The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Grand Patriot Hotel as Lieutenant Colonel Helena Vasquez pulled her sedan into a spot near the service entrance. She checked her watch and winced. 2 hours late. The funeral had run longer than expected, and changing clothes had been out of the question. She smoothed down her simple black dress and grabbed her blazer from the passenger seat, the fabric still carrying the faint scent of church incense. The annual Military Excellence Gala was already in full swing. Through the glass doors, she could see officers in their dress blues mingling in the grand ballroom, their medals catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. Helena had been specifically invited by General Thornton himself to receive recognition for her advisory work on the new combat readiness protocols. But first, she needed to find the coordinator and explain her tardiness. She pushed through the service entrance, her low heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The hallway bustled with activity as catering staff rushed back and forth with trays and supplies. Helena moved to the side to let a young man pass with a towering stack of plates. A sharp voice cut through the corridor noise. "Stop right there." Helena turned to find a woman in her 50s with a severe bun and a clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. The woman's eyes traveled up and down Helena's form with barely concealed irritation. "You are late," the woman said. "We have 300 guests and 2 servers called in sick. I do not have time for excuses." Helena opened her mouth to explain, but the woman was already thrusting an apron toward her. "Put this on. The generals need their lunch service started immediately. Table assignments are posted in the kitchen. Move quickly." "I think there has been a misunderstanding," Helena began, but the woman had already turned away, barking orders at 2 other staff members struggling with a cart of wine bottles. "Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed similar moments of misunderstanding in your own community, especially around military events." Helena stood holding the apron, a bemused smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She had faced down insurgents in Kandahar and negotiated with hostile village elders in remote mountain valleys. She had earned her Silver Star pulling 3 wounded soldiers from a burning vehicle while under enemy fire. Surely she could navigate this situation with grace. A young man in chef whites appeared at her elbow. "First day?" he asked sympathetically. "Do not worry. Miss Patterson seems terrifying, but she calms down once service starts. Here, let me show you where the kitchen is." Helena allowed herself to be guided down the corridor, the absurdity of the situation beginning to settle in. She could simply explain who she was, flash her military identification, ask for General Thornton, but something made her hesitate. Perhaps it was the exhaustion from the funeral, or maybe it was curiosity about how far this misunderstanding might go. The kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. Chefs called out orders while servers assembled trays with practiced efficiency. The young man, who introduced himself as Marcus, handed her a serving tray already laden with salads. "You have got tables 12 through 16, he explained. "All high brass, generals and colonels. Be polite, do not make eye contact unless spoken to, and whatever you do, do not spill anything on General Whitmore. He sent back 3 servers last month." Helena lifted the tray with the ease of someone who had carried far heavier loads in far more dangerous circumstances. She moved through the swinging doors into the ballroom, her posture instinctively straightening despite the server's uniform she now wore over her black dress. The ballroom was even more impressive from inside. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each surrounded by officers whose chests displayed ribbons and medals earned through years of service and sacrifice. At the front of the room, a stage was set for the afternoon's presentations and awards. Helena approached table 12 and began setting down the salad plates with quiet efficiency. The 4 colonels seated there barely glanced at her, deep in conversation about budget allocations and deployment schedules. She moved to table 13, then 14, her movements smooth and practiced. At table 15, she paused. General Whitmore sat at the head, his broad shoulders filling out his dress uniform, his jaw set in a permanent expression of displeasure. To his right sat two brigadier generals she recognized from joint operations briefings. To his left were three full colonels, all male, all engaged in what appeared to be a spirited debate about air support protocols. Helena set down the first plate. As she reached across to place the second, General Whitmore shifted suddenly, and her arm brushed against his shoulder. "Watch what you are doing," he snapped without looking up at her. "This uniform costs more than you make in a month." "My apologies, sir," Helena said quietly, completing the service and moving to the next table. She could feel her jaw tightening, a familiar sensation from her years of service when dealing with officers who mistook volume for leadership. But she maintained her composure, finishing the salad service and returning to the kitchen for the next course. The kitchen had grown even more frenetic as the main course service approached. Helena found herself stationed at the plating area, watching as chefs arranged medallions of beef with precise, artistic movements. Marcus appeared beside her again, his face flushed from the heat of the kitchen. "They are adding table 17 to your section," he said apologetically. "Miss Patterson says you are handling the brass better than the others. Less nervous, I guess." Helena nodded, accepting another tray. She had spent the last 20 minutes serving tables, enduring dismissive waves, and being spoken to as if she were invisible. It was a peculiar experience for someone accustomed to commanding respect in briefing rooms and on the battlefield. Yet something about the situation felt almost meditative. No one expected anything from her except efficient service. No lives hung in the balance. No split-second decisions would determine who lived or died. She moved back into the ballroom, navigating between tables with the tray balanced perfectly. Years of physical training had given her a core strength that made carrying heavy loads seem effortless. At table 16, she set down plates before a group of senior officers who continued their conversation as if she did not exist. "The Pentagon is pushing for accelerated deployment timelines," one colonel said, "but they have no concept of the logistical challenges we face on the ground." Helena bit her tongue. She had written 3 comprehensive reports on exactly that subject, reports that had been distributed to senior leadership just last month. But this was not the time or place. As she approached table 17, she noticed it was positioned slightly apart from the others, closer to the stage. The nameplate at the head of the table read General Margaret Thornton. Helena felt her pulse quicken slightly. General Thornton was the reason she was here, the officer who had specifically requested her presence for recognition. The general had not yet arrived at her seat. Helena quickly served the empty places, her movements efficient and practiced. As she set down the final plate, she heard footsteps behind her. "You there, server?" Helena turned to find General Whitmore, standing uncomfortably close, his expression twisted with irritation. His face was flushed, and she could smell the bourbon on his breath. "This beef is overdone," he announced loudly, holding up his plate. "I specifically requested medium rare. Are you people incapable of following simple instructions?" Several nearby tables fell silent, officers turning to watch the confrontation. Helena maintained her composure, her voice steady and professional. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir. I will have the kitchen prepare a new plate immediately." She reached for the offending dish, but Whitmore pulled it back. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he demanded. "I have served this country for 32 years. I have commanded thousands of troops, and I cannot get a properly cooked steak at a military gala." Helena met his gaze evenly, something in her eyes causing him to hesitate for just a moment. Then his bluster returned. "What is your name?" he barked. "I want to speak to your supervisor about your incompetence." Before Helena could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here, General Whitmore?" A young captain had approached from a nearby table, his expression careful and diplomatic. Helena recognized the insignia of the Judge Advocate General Corps on his uniform. His nameplate read Reyes. "This server brought me an overcooked steak," Whitmore said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "And now she stands here arguing with me instead of fixing the problem." "I did not argue, sir," Helena said quietly. "I offered to have a new plate prepared." The captain glanced at Helena, and something flickered in his expression. A moment of confusion, perhaps recognition that something was not quite right about this situation. But he smoothly intervened. "I am certain this was simply a kitchen error, General. I will personally escort this server to ensure the matter is resolved immediately." He gestured for Helena to follow, and she did, grateful for the extraction even as she found the entire situation increasingly surreal. They walked together toward the kitchen entrance, out of earshot of the tables. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," Captain Reyes said quietly. "General Whitmore has been drinking since lunch. He gets like this at these events." "I appreciate your intervention," Helena replied, "though I have dealt with worse." Something in her tone made the captain look at her more carefully. His eyes traveled from her face to the simple black dress visible beneath the server's apron, then to her hands. Helena knew what he was seeing. Hands that were strong and capable, with faint scars across the knuckles. Not the hands of someone who had spent their life in food service. "Have we met before?" Captain Reyes asked slowly. "You seem familiar." "I do not believe so," Helena said, though she knew exactly why she seemed familiar. She had given a lecture on military law and rules of engagement at the JAG school just 6 months ago. Captain Reyes had likely been in the audience. Before he could pursue the question further, Miss Patterson appeared, her clipboard clutched even tighter than before. "What's the problem now?" she demanded. "We are behind schedule, and General Thornton will be arriving any moment for her table." "There is a small issue with one of the orders," Captain Reyes explained. "It has been resolved. I was just ensuring your staff member here was not too shaken by the confrontation." Miss Patterson looked at Helena with barely concealed impatience. "Well, are you capable of continuing, or do I need to pull someone else from the kitchen?" "I am fine," Helena assured her. "I will get the replacement dish now." "Good," Miss Patterson snapped. "And after you deliver it, I need you to cover the head table. My most experienced server just quit." Apparently General Whitmore yelling made her cry. "You seem to have a thicker skin." Helena suppressed a smile. If only they knew just how thick that skin had become, forged in the crucible of combat and command. Helena returned to the kitchen and waited as the chef prepared a fresh plate for General Whitmore. She stood near the service window, watching the controlled chaos of the kitchen staff working in perfect synchronization. It reminded her of military operations, each person knowing their role, executing with precision under pressure. Marcus sidled up beside her, lowering his voice. "I heard what happened out there. Whitmore is notorious. Last year, he made a server so nervous that the poor guy dropped an entire tray of desserts. Whitmore had him fired on the spot." Helena accepted the replacement plate, its surface still steaming. "I have handled difficult personalities before," she said simply. She moved back through the swinging doors, crossing the ballroom floor with steady purpose. The conversations at various tables had resumed, though several officers glanced her way as she passed. She could feel their eyes on her, some sympathetic, others merely curious about the server who had drawn General Whitmore's ire. At table 15, she set the new plate before Whitmore without a word. He cut into the beef immediately, examining the pink center with the scrutiny of a quality control inspector. After a long moment, he grunted and began eating without acknowledging her presence. Helena took it as dismissal and turned to leave. "Wait," Whitmore called out. She paused, turning back. "Bring me another bourbon. Neat. And make it a double." "Of course, sir," Helena replied, already moving toward the bar stationed at the far end of the ballroom. The bartender, an older gentleman with kind eyes and silver hair, prepared the drink without comment. As he slid it across the polished wood surface, he spoke quietly. "You handle that well. Most people crumble when Whitmore starts shouting. Military background? Something like that," Helena said, accepting the glass. The bartender smiled knowingly, but asked no further questions. Helena returned to Whitmore's table and set down the bourbon. This time, he waved her away immediately, already deep in conversation with the brigadier general to his right about force projection capabilities in Eastern Europe. As she walked away, Helena caught fragments of their discussion. The general was advocating for aggressive forward deployment, dismissing concerns about local political complexities. Helena had spent 18 months in that exact region as a liaison officer. She knew intimately the delicate balance required, the relationships that took years to build and seconds to destroy. The general's proposed approach would be disastrous. She forced herself to keep walking, to maintain the role she had somehow found herself playing. The irony was not lost on her. In this room, full of military leadership, she was perhaps one of the most qualified people to speak on half the topics being discussed, yet she moved among them invisible, serving food and clearing plates. Miss Patterson intercepted her near the kitchen entrance. The head table needs full service now. General Thornton has arrived and is bringing several distinguished guests. I need you on your best behavior. No incidents, no mistakes. This is the most important table of the evening. Understood, Helena said, feeling her stomach tighten slightly. She had been anticipating this moment with a mixture of amusement and dread. How would General Thornton react when she realized her guest of honor was serving her dinner? Helena collected a tray of appetizers and approached the head table. It was positioned on a raised platform, giving the distinguished guests a view of the entire ballroom. General Margaret Thornton sat at the center, her posture ramrod straight, her silver hair cut in a precise military style. At 62, she was one of the most respected officers in the service, known for her strategic brilliance and unwavering integrity. To Thornton's right sat a two-star Admiral Helena did not recognize, his naval dress whites immaculate. To her left was a senior Defense Department official whose face Helena had seen in briefings, but whose name escaped her at the moment. Several other high-ranking officers and civilians filled out the remaining seats. Helena began serving the appetizers, starting at the far end of the table and working her way toward the center. Her hands were steady, her movements professional. She kept her eyes down, focused on the task, hoping to delay recognition for just a little longer. As she placed an appetizer before the Defense Department official, he glanced up at her briefly. "Thank you," he said absently, then returned to his conversation with the Admiral about naval readiness assessments. Helena moved to General Thornton's place, setting down the delicate plate of smoked salmon and capers with careful precision. The general did not look up, engaged in reading something on her tablet. Helena stepped back, preparing to move to the next seat. General Thornton's voice stopped her. "Server, could you bring me sparkling water with lime? No ice." "Of course, ma'am," Helena replied, keeping her voice neutral. She turned to leave, but Thornton spoke again, still without looking up from her tablet. "And could you check with the coordinator about when Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez will be arriving? She was supposed to be here 2 hours ago. I am beginning to worry something has happened." Helena felt a small smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "I will inquire, ma'am," she said, moving away quickly before the general could look up and see her face. At the bar, she requested the sparkling water, her mind racing. The situation had spiraled into something far more complicated than she had intended. What had started as a moment of tired acquiescence to a misunderstanding had become an elaborate charade. She should simply approach General Thornton, explain the confusion, and take her place as an honored guest. But something held her back. Perhaps it was the weight of the day, the emotional exhaustion from saying goodbye to her former squad leader at the funeral. Perhaps it was the strange freedom of being invisible, of moving through this world of power and prestige without the burden of rank and expectation. Or perhaps it was something darker, a curiosity about how these officers behaved when they thought no one of consequence was watching. She collected the sparkling water and returned to the head table, setting it before General Thornton with the same quiet efficiency. The general murmured her thanks without looking up, and Helena retreated to await the next course, still hidden in plain sight. The main course service had begun in earnest, and Helena found herself moving between the kitchen and the head table with increasing frequency. Each trip brought her closer to General Thornton, yet the general remained focused on her conversations and tablet, never once looking directly at the server attending to her needs. As Helena cleared the appetizer plates, she overheard the Admiral discussing force readiness in the Pacific Theater. His assessment was outdated, based on intelligence reports that Helena knew had been superseded by more recent developments. She had seen the classified briefings just last week. The temptation to interject to correct the misunderstanding that could lead to flawed strategic planning was almost overwhelming. Instead, she balanced the plates carefully and returned to the kitchen, where Marcus was gulping water and looking frazzled. "Table 9 is demanding to see a manager," he said. "They claim their wine is corked. I cannot even tell what that means." Helena glanced toward the table in question. "I will handle it," she offered. Marcus looked relieved and grateful. She approached table 9 with a fresh bottle of the same vintage and her most diplomatic expression. The colonel at the head of the table was in mid-rant when she arrived. "This is completely unacceptable," he was saying to his dinner companions. "The quality of service at these events has deteriorated significantly. In my day, we had standards." "I apologize for the issue," Helena said smoothly, showing him the new bottle. "May I offer you a replacement?" The colonel squinted at the label, then at Helena. He seemed surprised by her calm competence. "Well, at least someone here knows what they are doing." "Yes, pour for the table." Helena opened the bottle with practiced ease and poured for each guest, her movements fluid and confident. The colonel watched her with a critical eye, then nodded grudgingly. "That is proper technique. Where did you learn to serve wine like that?" "I have worked various events over the years," Helena said simply, which was technically true. She had attended enough diplomatic functions and military banquets in her career to observe proper service protocol countless times. As she turned to leave, the colonel called after her. "What is your name? I want to remember to request you specifically for future events." "Helena," she replied without thinking, then immediately regretted it. But the colonel had already turned back to his companions, satisfied with the resolution. She returned to the head table where the main course awaited distribution. The plates were works of art, each element positioned with precision. Helena served them methodically, her presence becoming almost invisible through sheer consistency and professionalism. General Thornton was now engaged in an animated discussion with a Defense Department official about strategic resource allocation. The conversation had turned to combat readiness protocols, the very subject for which Helena was supposed to be receiving recognition today. The official was skeptical. "These new protocols sound comprehensive on paper, Thornton, but I am not convinced they address the real-world challenges our commanders face in theater." "Who developed this framework?" "A brilliant officer on my staff," General Thornton replied with unmistakable pride. "Lieutenant Colonel Helena Vasquez. She has extensive combat experience and an analytical mind that is absolutely exceptional. Her insights have already saved countless lives in training scenarios." Helena nearly fumbled the water pitcher she was holding. She recovered quickly, setting it down on the table with steady hands. "I look forward to meeting her," the official said. "Is she here tonight?" "She should be," Thornton said, a note of concern creeping into her voice. "She confirmed her attendance last week. It is unlike her to be late without communication." Helena felt a pang of guilt. Her phone was in her car, turned off since the funeral. She had not even thought to check it for messages from the general's office. As she stepped back from the table, she noticed Captain Reyes entering the ballroom. He was scanning the room, and when his eyes landed on her, they narrowed with recognition and confusion. He began walking toward the head table with purpose. Helena moved quickly toward the kitchen, hoping to avoid another interaction with the perceptive young captain. But Miss Patterson intercepted her in the corridor, her clipboard now looking more like a weapon than an organizational tool. "I need you to stay with the head table for the remainder of service," she commanded. "You are the only server who has not made a mistake tonight." General Thornton specifically commented on the professionalism of her service. The irony was almost too much. Helena nodded her compliance and returned to her post, positioning herself near the kitchen entrance where she could observe the head table while remaining somewhat out of direct sight lines. Captain Reyes had reached General Thornton and was speaking to her quietly, gesturing occasionally toward where Helena stood. The general glanced in her direction, but from this distance, and in the dim lighting of the ballroom's periphery, recognition was unlikely. Helena watched as Reyes continued speaking, saw General Thornton's expression shift from curious to concerned. The general pulled out her phone and typed rapidly, presumably trying to reach the missing lieutenant colonel one more time. A few moments later, Helena felt her own phone vibrate in her blazer pocket, the sensation muted but unmistakable. 3 times it buzzed. 3 missed calls or messages, all certainly from General Thornton or her staff. The situation had become untenable. Helena knew she should step forward, explain the misunderstanding, and end this charade. Yet something kept her frozen in place. Perhaps it was pride, not wanting to admit she had allowed such a ridiculous situation to develop. Perhaps it was curiosity, wondering how much longer she could maintain this impossible position. Or perhaps it was something deeper, a desire to see how these officers truly behaved when they thought they were among only their peers. Marcus appeared at her elbow with a tray of dessert plates. "They want these served immediately," he whispered. "General Thornton has a presentation to make before the award ceremony, and they are running behind schedule." Helena accepted the tray and moved once more toward the head table, toward General Thornton, toward the inevitable moment of revelation that was approaching with the inexorability of a combat operation reaching its critical phase. Her heart was steady, her hands calm. Whatever came next, she had faced far worse on battlefields half a world away. She began serving dessert, moving around the table with mechanical efficiency. General Thornton was still on her phone, her expression now openly worried. Helena set the dessert before her last, and this time, the general looked up directly at her. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, General Thornton's eyes met Helena's. The general's gaze was sharp, analytical, the eyes of someone trained to assess situations and personnel with ruthless efficiency. Helena kept her expression neutral, professional, meeting the general's eyes with the same steady composure she had maintained throughout the evening. "Thank you," General Thornton said finally, her tone distant and preoccupied. The moment passed, and she returned her attention to her phone, typing another urgent message. Helena released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The lighting, the context, the sheer impossibility of the situation had protected her identity once more. General Thornton was looking for her honored guest, not seeing the possibility that her guest was serving her dessert. As Helena stepped back, she heard Thornton speaking to the Defense Department official. "I'm going to have to begin my presentation without her. This is extremely unlike Helena. I am genuinely concerned something serious has happened." The guilt twisted deeper in Helena's chest. She was causing genuine worry to a superior officer she respected immensely. This had gone too far. She needed to end it now, step forward and explain. Her hand moved instinctively toward the apron strings, ready to remove the costume and reveal herself. "Excuse me, server." Helena turned to find General Whitmore standing beside the head table, his face even more flushed than before, his eyes slightly unfocused. The bourbon had clearly taken its toll. He held an empty glass in one hand and gestured dismissively with the other. "I need another drink," he announced loudly, his voice carrying across the nearby tables. "And this time, try to bring it before I die of thirst." Several officers at adjacent tables looked up, their conversations faltering. General Thornton glanced toward Whitmore with barely concealed disapproval, but she said nothing, unwilling to cause a scene moments before her presentation. "Right away, sir," Helena said quietly, reaching for the glass. Whitmore pulled it back, a mean-spirited smile crossing his face. "You know what? I have changed my mind. I do not think you are competent enough to handle even that simple task. You probably cannot tell bourbon from dishwater." The ballroom had grown noticeably quieter. More people were watching now, sensing confrontation. Helena felt her jaw tighten, her military bearing threatening to surface. She forced herself to remain in character, to maintain the submissive posture expected of service staff. "I assure you I can manage the task, sir," she said evenly. "Can you?" Whitmore stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that would never be acceptable between officers. "I think you're like most of these servers. Barely competent, no ambition. No real skills. Just going through the motions for a paycheck. Helena felt something shift inside her. She had endured much this evening with patience and even humor. But this crossed a line, not because it was directed at her personally, but because of what it represented. The casual cruelty, the thoughtless disrespect toward people Whitmore considered beneath him. "Sir," Helena said, her voice still controlled, but with an edge of steel entering it. "I will get your drink now. Please step back. Please step back." Whitmore laughed, a harsh sound. "Listen to this one giving me orders. Do you have any idea what I have done for this country? The sacrifices I have made? The men I have commanded?" Helena met his eyes directly, no longer bothering to maintain the downcast gaze of a subservient server. "With respect, sir, I imagine many people in this room have made sacrifices for this country. Service takes many forms. Something in her tone, her bearing, or perhaps the unwavering directness of her gaze seemed to penetrate even Whitmore's alcohol-fueled belligerence. He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. For a moment, he seemed to see her differently, to recognize something that did not fit his mental image of who she should be. But the moment passed. His face reddened further, and he opened his mouth to deliver what was clearly going to be a blistering response. "General Whitmore," a new voice cut in, sharp and commanding. "That is quite enough." General Thornton had risen from her seat, her small frame radiating authority that filled the space around her. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Thornton's expression was severe, her eyes locked on Whitmore with an intensity that could strip paint from walls. "You are drunk," Thornton stated flatly. "You are making a spectacle of yourself and embarrassing this entire gathering. I suggest you return to your table and remain there for the rest of the evening." Whitmore sputtered, his face cycling through shades of red and purple. "Margaret, I was simply trying to get proper service from this incompetent server who seems to think she can talk back to a general officer." "The server was being perfectly professional," Thornton replied coldly. "You were being aggressive and inappropriate. This behavior is beneath the uniform you wear. Now sit down before I have security escort you out." The threat hung in the air. Whitmore looked around, seeming to suddenly register the dozens of eyes watching the confrontation. His bluster deflated like a punctured tire. He mumbled something incoherent and stumbled back toward his table, where his companions carefully avoided eye contact. General Thornton turned to Helena, her expression softening slightly. "I apologize that you had to endure that. General Whitmore has been under considerable stress lately, though that is no excuse for his conduct. Are you all right?" "I am fine, ma'am," Helena said quietly. "Thank you for your intervention." Thornton studied her for a moment longer than necessary, that same analytical gaze that had swept over her earlier. "What is your name?" "Helena, mum." "Well, Helena, you handled that situation with remarkable composure and dignity. It is clear you have experience dealing with difficult personalities." "Something like that, ma'am," Helena replied, echoing her earlier words to the bartender. Thornton nodded slowly, then glanced at her watch. "I need to begin my presentation. Would you mind ensuring my water glass stays full during my remarks? I tend to get a dry throat when speaking to large groups." "Of course, ma'am." As General Thornton moved toward the podium at the front of the ballroom, Helena positioned herself near the head table where she could monitor the general's water glass. The irony of the situation had reached absurd heights. She was about to listen to General Thornton give a presentation that would include recognition of Lieutenant Colonel Helena Vasquez's achievements Helena herself had earned, while standing ready to refill water like an attentive servant. The lights dimmed slightly, and a spotlight illuminated the podium. General Thornton stepped up to the microphone, her posture perfect, her presence commanding immediate attention from the hundreds of officers filling the ballroom. General Thornton's voice filled the ballroom, clear and authoritative even without amplification, though the microphone carried her words to every corner of the vast space. "Good evening, distinguished guests, fellow officers, honored civilians. Thank you all for joining us at this year's Military Excellence Gala." Helena stood motionless near the head table, the water pitcher in her hands, watching a woman she deeply respected address the assembled crowd. The surreal nature of her situation had somehow transcended absurdity and entered a realm of profound discomfort. Tonight we gather to recognize exceptional service, innovative thinking, and the kind of leadership that transforms our military into a more effective and humane institution, Thornton continued. We honor those who push boundaries, challenge outdated thinking, and never forget that behind every strategy and protocol are real human lives. The general paused, her eyes scanning the room. Helena could see the concern still etched in the lines around Thornton's eyes, the worry for her missing guest of honor barely concealed beneath her professional composure. One of the officers I had hoped to recognize tonight has not yet arrived, and I must confess to considerable concern for her well-being. Lieutenant Colonel Helena Vasquez is one of the finest officers I have had the privilege to command. Her work on combat readiness protocols has already been adopted across 3 theaters of operation, and preliminary data suggests her frameworks have reduced preventable casualties by nearly 18%. The room murmured with appreciation. Helena felt heat rising in her cheeks, grateful for the dim lighting that kept her partially concealed. Several officers at nearby tables glanced around, perhaps wondering if the missing lieutenant colonel had arrived. Colonel Vasquez earned her Silver Star in Kandahar, Thornton said, her voice taking on a reverent quality. While serving as a liaison officer, her convoy was ambushed. Despite being wounded herself, she pulled 3 critically injured soldiers from a burning vehicle while under sustained enemy fire. She then organized a defensive perimeter and held position for 40 minutes until extraction arrived. 2 of those soldiers she saved that day are still serving. One is in this room tonight. Thornton gestured toward a table near the back where a young major stood, his face solemn. He raised his hand in acknowledgement, and the ballroom erupted in respectful applause. Helena recognized him, though they had not spoken since his recovery. Seeing him healthy and whole sent a wave of emotion through her that she had to actively suppress. But Helena Vasquez is not just a warrior, Thornton continued as the applause faded. She is a thinker and innovator. After her combat service, she could have rested on her laurels, accepted any number of cushy administrative posts. Instead, she returned to school, earned a master's degree in strategic studies, and began the difficult work of translating battlefield experience into institutional knowledge. Her protocols do not just save lives. They honor the reality of combat, the complexity of human behavior under stress, and the sacred responsibility we bear when we send our people into harm's way. Helena watched as officers throughout the room nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting respect for someone they had never met. The weight of their regard, aimed at her accomplishments while she stood invisible among them, created a pressure in her chest that was almost physical. I hope Colonel Vasquez is simply delayed and will join us soon, Thornton said. In her absence, I want to share why her work matters so profoundly. Too often, our protocols are developed by people far removed from the realities of combat. They create elegant solutions to theoretical problems while ignoring the messy, complicated truth of what happens when theory meets reality. The general's passion was evident now, her voice carrying the conviction of someone speaking about matters of life and death. Helena Vasquez understands that truth because she has lived it. She has made life or death decisions in seconds. She has felt the weight of responsibility for the soldiers under her command, and she has paid the price that combat demands from all who serve. Helena saw Captain Reyes standing near the entrance, his attention fixed not on General Thornton, but on her. Even in the dim light, she could see the recognition dawning in his expression. He took a step forward, then hesitated, uncertainty written clearly on his face. The general was still speaking. The protocols Colonel Vasquez developed address everything from pre-deployment stress indicators to post-combat integration support. But more than that, they represent a fundamental shift in how we think about preparing our people for the realities they will face. She does not believe in making soldiers harder or more calloused. She believes in making them more resilient, more adaptable, more human. Miss Patterson appeared suddenly at Helena's elbow, her whisper urgent. We need to start preparing coffee service for after the presentation. Can you handle the head table setup while the others manage the floor? Helena nodded mutely, unable to tear her eyes from General Thornton, who was building toward her conclusion. I have served this country for 38 years, Thornton said. I have known thousands of officers, worked alongside some of the finest military minds of our generation. And I can say without reservation that Lieutenant Colonel Helena Vasquez represents the very best of what our military can be. When she does arrive tonight, I hope you will all join me in recognizing her extraordinary contributions to our shared mission. The applause that followed was thunderous. Officers stood, their appreciation genuine and heartfelt. Helena remained frozen, the water pitcher still clutched in her hands, as the ballroom celebrated achievements she had earned through blood and dedication and sleepless nights spent translating trauma into frameworks that might spare others the same pain. General Thornton stepped away from the podium, and the lights came up slightly. The formal portion of the evening was transitioning into the reception and award ceremony. Helena forced herself to move, to return to the kitchen and begin the coffee service setup as instructed. In the corridor outside the ballroom, she finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She set down the water pitcher and leaned against the wall, her composure threatening to crack for the first time all evening. What had started as a simple misunderstanding had become something far more complex, a situation that reflected uncomfortable truths about visibility, recognition, and the assumptions people made based on context and appearance. Helena, a voice called softly. She looked up to find Captain Reyes approaching, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning certainty. His eyes moved to her face, really seeing her for the first time without the filter of his expectations. She watched as pieces fell into place in his mind, watched as understanding replaced uncertainty. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Is it you? Helena straightened, her military bearing reasserting itself instinctively. Before she could respond, before she could decide how to handle this moment of revelation, Miss Patterson's voice cut through the corridor. There you are. The coffee service needs to start immediately. General Thornton is asking for her guests to be served promptly. She is already frustrated that her honored guest has not appeared. Let us not add to her disappointment. Captain Reyes stood motionless in the corridor, his mouth slightly open as if frozen mid-sentence. Helena met his gaze for a long moment, seeing the questions forming behind his eyes, the disbelief warring with certainty. She gave him the slightest shake of her head, a wordless plea for discretion, then turned to follow Miss Patterson back toward the kitchen. Ma'am, wait, Reyes called after her, but Helena was already moving through the swinging doors, leaving him alone in the corridor with his revelation. The kitchen had reached its final crescendo of organized chaos. Coffee urns were being filled, dessert wines were being decanted, and trays of petit fours were being arranged with artistic precision. Marcus was orchestrating 3 servers simultaneously, his earlier nervousness replaced by the focused efficiency of someone who had found a rhythm. Helena moved to the coffee station, her hands working automatically to prepare the service trays. Her mind, however, was racing through calculations and consequences. Captain Reyes knew. It was only a matter of time before he brought it to someone's attention, before the entire charade collapsed in spectacular fashion. She should step forward now, control the narrative, explain herself with dignity and tact. But Miss Patterson was already thrusting a tray of coffee service into her hands, her clipboard now looking decidedly worse for wear. Head table first. General Thornton takes hers black. The Admiral prefers cream, no sugar. The defense official drinks decaf with both cream and sugar. The placements are marked on the tray. Helena accepted the tray and moved back into the ballroom. The atmosphere had shifted during her brief absence. The formal tension of the presentation had given way to something more relaxed, more social. Officers mingled between tables, conversations flowing more freely now that the official business was concluded. As she approached the head table, Helena noticed General Thornton was on her phone again, speaking in low, urgent tones. The general's face was drawn with genuine worry now, the professional mask slipping to reveal authentic concern for her missing officer. Helena began distributing the coffee cups, her movements mechanical, her thoughts elsewhere. She placed the black coffee before General Thornton, who barely acknowledged the service, too focused on her phone conversation. "Yes, I understand," Thornton was saying, "but it has been hours now with no response. This is completely out of character for her. I want someone to check her residence and her last known locations, and contact the funeral home in Arlington. She mentioned attending a service this afternoon." Helena's hand trembled slightly as she placed the Admiral's coffee. The funeral. Of course Thornton would have known about it, would have made the connection. Helena had mentioned it in passing during their last briefing, explaining she might arrive at the gala slightly later than planned. The general ended her call and looked up, catching Helena's eye unexpectedly. Their faces were closer now than they had been earlier, and in the brighter post-presentation lighting, recognition flickered across Thornton's features. Not full recognition, but something, a sense of familiarity that did not quite fit the context. "Have we met before?" Thornton asked slowly, her analytical mind working through the puzzle. "You seem remarkably familiar." Helena felt the moment crystallizing, the decision point arriving with the inevitability of dawn. She could deflect again, maintain the pretense for a few more minutes. Or she could end this now, face the consequences of her strange choices this evening with whatever grace she could muster. Before she could respond, General Whitmore's voice cut through the ballroom, loud and slurred and venomous. "There she is. There is that insolent server who thinks she could talk back to her betters." Helena turned to find Whitmore approaching, his gait unsteady, his face mottled with anger and alcohol. Several officers at nearby tables looked up in alarm. Captain Reyes had re-entered the ballroom and was moving quickly to intercept, but Whitmore was closer. "You embarrassed me earlier," Whitmore announced, jabbing a finger toward Helena. "Made me look foolish in front of my peers. Well, I want everyone to know what kind of disrespectful, incompetent staff this establishment employs." "General Whitmore," Captain Reyes called out, reaching them just as Whitmore arrived at the head table. "Sir, I think you should return to your quarters. You are clearly not well." "I am fine," Whitmore snapped. "What I am is tired of being disrespected. This server, this nobody, has been walking around this ballroom all evening with an attitude like she belongs here, like she is something special." He turned back to Helena, his eyes unfocused, but his malice sharp. "Where are you anyway? Some college dropout who could not make it in the real world? Too stupid for any real career, so you end up serving food to people who actually matter?" The ballroom had gone quiet again, but this time the silence was different, uncomfortable. Officers shifted in their seats, embarrassed by Whitmore's behavior but uncertain how to intervene. General Thornton had risen from her seat, her expression darkening. "General Whitmore," Thornton said, her voice like ice, "you are relieved. Leave this event immediately, or I will have you placed under arrest for conduct unbecoming." But Whitmore was beyond reason now, beyond even basic self-preservation. He stepped closer to Helena, invading her space aggressively. "People like you," he sneered. "You think you could just blend in with your betters, put on a uniform, serve some food, and suddenly you are part of something important. But you are not. You will never be anything more than what you are right now. Invisible, insignificant, forgotten the moment you leave the room." Helena felt something inside her shift and settle, like tectonic plates finding their natural alignment after long displacement. She had maintained her composure throughout the evening's absurdities and indignities. She had found humor in the misunderstanding, patience with the dismissiveness, even a strange peace in temporary invisibility. But this was different. Whitmore was not just attacking her. He was attacking everyone like her, everyone he considered beneath him, every enlisted soldier who had saved his life, every junior officer who had covered for his mistakes, every person who had served with honor while he had served with arrogance. Helena set down the coffee tray with deliberate precision on the head table. She straightened to her full height, her posture shifting from service staff to something else entirely. Something that made several nearby officers instinctively straighten in their own seats. "General Whitmore," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight and authority that seemed to change the very air in the room. "I need you to step back now." The change in her tone was so profound that even Whitmore, drunk as he was, seemed to register it. His face showed confusion, then a flicker of something that might have been recognition or fear. "Who do you think you are?" he began, but Helena cut him off. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Helena Vasquez," she said clearly, her voice reaching every corner of the now silent ballroom. "And I am the officer General Thornton has been waiting for all evening." She reached up and unbuttoned her blazer, letting it fall open. There, pinned to her black dress over her heart, was her silver star, its distinctive bronze star and red and white striped ribbon unmistakable even in the ballroom lighting. The metal caught the light, seeming to glow with its own inner fire. The silence that followed was absolute. The silence stretched and deepened, becoming something almost physical in its intensity. 300 military officers, some of the most powerful and experienced leaders in the armed forces, stood frozen in collective shock. Eyes moved from Helena's face to the silver star on her chest, then to General Thornton, whose expression had transformed from confusion to stunned comprehension. General Whitmore stood closest to Helena, his face cycling through a rapid succession of emotions. Confusion gave way to disbelief, disbelief to horrified recognition, recognition to a sickly pallor as the full weight of his behavior crashed down upon him. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish drowning in air. "Helena," General Thornton breathed, her voice barely audible. The general took a step forward, her eyes searching Helena's face as if confirming reality. "You have been here all evening?" "Yes, ma'am," Helena replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I arrived late from a funeral and was mistaken for catering staff. The situation escalated before I could correct it." "Escalated," Thornton repeated, her tone flat with suppressed emotion. She looked around the ballroom, at the hundreds of witnesses, then back to Helena. "You have been serving us dinner." "Yes, ma'am." Thornton's eyes moved to the apron Helena still wore over her black dress, to her hands that had poured coffee and cleared plates, to the water pitcher she had carried throughout the evening. The general's face was unreadable, a mask of professional control barely containing something volcanic beneath. General Whitmore seemed to recover his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "I did not know. I had no idea who you were." Helena turned to face him fully, her expression neutral, but her eyes hard as flint. "Would it have mattered, General? If I had been exactly who you thought I was, would that have justified your behavior? Does someone need to wear their medals for you to treat them with basic human decency?" Whitmore flinched as if she had struck him. Around the ballroom, officers began to stir, whispered conversations breaking out like brush fires. Helena could hear fragments of discussion, shock and disbelief mixing with admiration and secondhand embarrassment. Captain Reyes had materialized at General Thornton's side, his face grave. "Ma'am, I recognized Colonel Vasquez approximately 15 minutes ago. I was attempting to bring it to your attention when the situation accelerated." Thornton nodded absently, her focus still fixed on Helena. The general's mind was clearly working through implications, calculating ramifications, processing the sheer absurdity and profundity of what had occurred. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried throughout the ballroom with commanding clarity. "Will everyone please return to their seats?" "Now." The room responded instantly, officers moving with military precision to their assigned places. Within 30 seconds, every guest was seated, attention focused on the head table where Helena stood with her blazer open, her silver star visible to all. Miss Patterson appeared from the kitchen entrance, her clipboard forgotten, her face stricken with horror as she finally understood what had happened. She opened her mouth to speak, but General Thornton silenced her with a single raised hand. Thornton turned back to Helena, And now her expression had shifted again. The shock was giving way to something else, something that might have been admiration mixed with exasperation. Colonel Vasquez, why in God's name did you not immediately correct this misunderstanding? Helena considered the question, aware that hundreds of people were waiting for her answer, that her response would be discussed and analyzed in officers' clubs and military circles for months to come. She could offer a simple explanation, blame exhaustion or confusion. But the truth was more complex and more important. Ma'am, I was tired from the funeral. I was emotionally depleted. When the misunderstanding occurred, it seemed easier to simply go along with it for a few minutes than to make a scene. I told myself I would correct it soon, but then I became curious about something. Curious about what? Thornton asked. Helena glanced around the ballroom at the assembled officers, many of whom would not meet her eyes. About how people behave when they think no one of consequence is watching. About what respect really means. About whether dignity is something we extend to others based on their rank and position or based on their simple humanity. The words landed like artillery in the silent ballroom. Several officers shifted uncomfortably. General Whitmore looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And what did you learn, Colonel? Thornton's voice was softer now, genuinely curious. I learned that kindness and cruelty are choices we make constantly, Helena said. I learned that some people treat everyone with respect regardless of their position, while others only respect those they perceive as powerful. I learned that the young man who showed me to the kitchen with patience and the bartender who spoke to me with kindness are worth 10 times any officer who sneers at those they consider beneath them. She paused, then continued. I also learned that my initial response to being disrespected was to retreat into silence rather than advocate for myself. That is something I need to examine. Because if I will not stand up for my own dignity when it costs me nothing, how can I expect the soldiers I lead to stand up for themselves when it might cost them everything? The ballroom remained absolutely silent. Helena could see officers processing her words, some nodding slowly, others looking thoughtful. The Defense Department official at the head table was watching her with an expression of fascinated respect. General Thornton studied Helena for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her austere features. That, she said, is exactly the kind of thinking that makes you invaluable to this institution. Only you could turn a case of mistaken identity into a masterclass on leadership and human dignity. The tension in the room broke like a fever. Scattered applause began, tentative at first, then building to a genuine ovation. Officers stood again, but this time they were looking at Helena with understanding and respect, acknowledging not just her achievements, but the lesson she had just taught them all. Helena felt her own tension beginning to ease, though she remained aware of General Whitmore standing nearby, his face ashen. She turned to face him directly, and the room quieted again, waiting to see what would happen next. General Whitmore, Helena said quietly, I accept your apology, though you have not yet offered it. And I want you to know that I do not hold personal animosity toward you. But I hope you will remember this evening the next time you are tempted to judge someone's worth by their position rather than their character. Whitmore looked like he had aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. He straightened with visible effort, attempting to summon what remained of his dignity. Colonel Vasquez, he said hoarsely, I apologize, completely and without reservation. My behavior tonight has been inexcusable. You have shown remarkable grace under circumstances I made unconscionable. Helena nodded acceptance. Then she reached up and removed the server's apron, folding it carefully before setting it on the head table. The symbolic gesture was clear to everyone watching. The performance was over. Lieutenant Colonel Helena Vasquez had returned. General Thornton gestured toward the empty chair at the head table, the seat that had been reserved for Helena all evening. Please, Colonel, join us. You have more than earned your place here tonight, though I suspect that was never in question. Helena moved around the table, aware of every eye following her progress. As she reached for the chair, the Defense Department official stood and extended his hand. Richard Chun, he said warmly, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for personnel and readiness. I have been reading your protocols for months. It is an honor to finally meet the mind behind such transformative work. Helena shook his hand, grateful for his graciousness. Thank you, sir. I hope the evening's unusual circumstances have not colored your impression of the work itself. Chun laughed, a rich, genuine sound. Colonel, I think you just demonstrated more about leadership, dignity, and institutional culture in 15 minutes than most officers manage in entire careers. If anything, this evening has convinced me we need to expand implementation of your protocols immediately. As Helena took her seat, General Thornton leaned closer, her voice low enough that only Helena could hear. I'm going to want a very detailed conversation about this evening, she murmured. But later, right now, I think we need to address the room before the rumor mill turns this into something even more complicated than it already is. Helena nodded her agreement. Thornton stood, and the ballroom fell silent instantly. 300 officers responding to the commanding presence of a general who had earned her authority through decades of exceptional service. Ladies and gentlemen, Thornton began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. Tonight has taken an unexpected turn, but I believe it has given us all something valuable to consider. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez arrived late to this event due to attending a funeral. Through a series of misunderstandings, she found herself serving us rather than being served as our honored guest. Thornton paused, letting the full weight of that statement settle over the room. Some of you treated the person you believed to be a server with kindness and respect. Others did not. Colonel Vasquez chose to allow this situation to continue, not out of malice or desire to embarrass anyone, but because she recognized an opportunity to learn something about human nature and about the culture we have created within our institutions. The general's eyes swept across the assembled officers, and Helena could see several people looking down at their tables, unable to meet that penetrating gaze. What she learned should concern us all. We pride ourselves on military values: honor, duty, respect, integrity. But if we only extend those values to people we perceive as equals or superiors, then we have betrayed the very principles we claim to serve. A colonel near the front raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, if I may speak? Thornton nodded. Colonel Brennan, please. The colonel stood, his face earnest. Ma'am, I think I speak for many of us when I say that tonight has been illuminating in ways that are frankly uncomfortable. I've been thinking about my own behavior, not just this evening, but throughout my career. How many times have I been dismissive of people I considered subordinate in ways that had nothing to do with military necessity? How many opportunities have I missed to show basic human decency because I was too focused on rank and position? He turned to look at Helena. Colonel Vasquez, thank you for holding up a mirror to our institutional culture. It is not always pleasant to see ourselves clearly, but it is necessary if we are to improve. Other officers began to stand, adding their own reflections and acknowledgments. A brigadier general admitted she had been rude to a young sergeant earlier in the week and vowed to apologize. A captain talked about the pressure to maintain distance from enlisted personnel and how that sometimes translated into coldness rather than professional respect. Helena listened to the outpouring of self-examination with a mixture of emotions. She had not intended to create this moment, had not sought to make herself an object lesson. But perhaps that was precisely why the lesson was so powerful. It had emerged organically from circumstances rather than being imposed from above. Marcus appeared tentatively at the edge of the ballroom, still in his server's uniform, his eyes wide as he tried to understand what was happening. Helena caught his eye and gestured for him to approach. He hesitated, then made his way carefully between the tables. Everyone, Helena said, rising from her seat. I would like you to meet Marcus. He showed me genuine kindness tonight when he believed I was a new server who needed guidance. He offered help without condescension, patience without superiority. That is leadership. That is the kind of character that makes organizations function with humanity intact. Marcus looked mortified at suddenly being the center of attention, but Helena could see pride fighting through his embarrassment. The ballroom erupted in applause for the young man who had simply done what should have been natural for everyone. As Marcus retreated back toward the kitchen, clearly overwhelmed, General Thornton spoke again. We will be making some changes to how we conduct these events going forward. Every officer present tonight will be required to submit a written reflection on this evening's events and what they learned about their own behavior and assumptions. These reflections will be part of your permanent service records. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room, but no one protested. Thornton's expression made clear this was not a suggestion. Additionally, Thornton continued, Colonel Vasquez's protocols will become mandatory training for all officers at the 04 level and above within the next fiscal year. If we cannot treat each other and those we encounter with basic dignity, then we have no business leading soldiers into situations where character and judgment mean the difference between life and death. The admiral at the head table leaned forward. General Thornton, if I may add to that, the Navy will be adopting similar mandatory training. What we witnessed tonight makes clear that cultural change cannot be optional. It must be systematic and universal. Secretary Chun nodded his agreement. The Department of Defense will support full implementation across all branches. Colonel Vasquez, I think your evening of serving coffee may end up transforming military culture in ways your protocols alone might not have achieved. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected sources. Helena felt the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. What had begun as a simple misunderstanding had become something much larger, a catalyst for institutional reflection and change. She hoped the momentum of this moment would translate into lasting transformation rather than fading into yet another well-intentioned initiative that died on the bureaucratic vine. General Whitmore, who had remained seated and silent throughout the discussions, finally stood. His face was still pale, but he had regained some measure of composure. Ma'am, he addressed General Thornton. I request permission to speak. Thornton regarded him coolly. Granted. Whitmore turned to face the assembled officers, his voice rough but steady. I want everyone here to know that my behavior tonight was inexcusable. I have no defense except arrogance, alcohol, and a profound failure of character. Colonel Vasquez showed me grace I do not deserve. I intend to enter counseling and address my drinking problem, which has clearly compromised my judgment and behavior. I also intend to formally apologize to every staff member I mistreated tonight and in the past. He paused, his eyes meeting Helena's briefly before looking away. I have served this country for 32 years. I have commanded thousands of troops, and tonight I learned that I have done so while fundamentally misunderstanding what leadership actually means. That is a bitter lesson at this stage of my career, but better late than never. The ballroom was silent as Whitmore sat back down, his confession hanging in the air like smoke after battle. The atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted profoundly. What had begun as a formal military gala had transformed into something more meaningful, a collective reckoning with institutional culture and personal responsibility. Officers who had been strangers an hour ago were engaged in deep conversations about leadership and character. The evening had become something none of them would forget. General Thornton gestured for Helena to stand beside her at the podium. The general's expression was complex, mixing pride, concern, and something that might have been amusement at the sheer audacity of what had transpired. Colonel Vasquez and I had planned a very different kind of recognition ceremony tonight, Thornton said to the assembled crowd. But I think what has occurred may be far more valuable than any speech I could have given. Helena stepped up to the podium, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. She had commanded troops in combat, had made life or death decisions under fire, but standing here before her peers to speak about dignity and respect felt somehow more vulnerable than facing enemy combatants. I want to be clear about something, Helena began, her voice steady. I did not plan any of this. I did not set out to teach lessons or expose failings. I was simply tired, grieving, and when the misunderstanding happened, I made a choice to let it continue. That choice had consequences I did not fully anticipate. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But now that we are here, in this moment, I think it is important to name what happened clearly. I am a decorated combat veteran. I have served this country with distinction. I have saved lives and developed protocols that continue to save lives. And tonight, for several hours, I was invisible to most of you. Not because I was trying to hide, but because you were not looking. The room remained absolutely silent, officers listening with the intensity usually reserved for tactical briefings. Helena continued. The server's uniform made me invisible in a way my rank and accomplishments never could. And that invisibility revealed something important about how we see the world, about whose dignity we consider automatic and whose dignity must be earned. She looked directly at several officers who had dismissed her earlier. Some of you were unkind tonight. Some of you were dismissive or rude or condescending. But I want you to understand something. I do not think you are bad people. I think you are products of a culture that has taught you, consciously or unconsciously, that respect flows downward only when convenient and upward always out of necessity. A colonel in the third row raised his hand. Ma'am, how we change that? How do we undo decades of ingrained behavior? Helena considered the question carefully. It starts with awareness, with understanding that every person you encounter is fully human, regardless of their rank or position. It continues with conscious choice, choosing to extend dignity even when it costs you nothing to withhold it. And it requires accountability, which is why General Thornton's mandate for written reflections is so important. Secretary Chin stood, his expression thoughtful. Colonel Vasquez, in your protocols you write about what you call dignity of purpose. Can you explain how tonight's events relate to that concept? Helena nodded, grateful for the opportunity to connect the evening's events to her larger body of work. Dignity of purpose is the idea that every role in an organization has inherent value and deserves respect. The cook who ensures troops are properly nourished, the mechanic who maintains equipment that saves lives, the administrative staff who ensure operations run smoothly. None of these roles are less important than combat leadership. They are simply different expressions of service. She gestured around the ballroom. Tonight, I was serving food. That is valuable work performed by valuable people. The fact that I'm also a lieutenant colonel does not make serving food beneath me. It makes it one of many things I'm capable of doing. But more importantly, the people who serve food regularly, who clean buildings, who perform all the tasks that keep our institutions functioning, those people deserve our respect, not because they might secretly be lieutenant colonels, but because they are human beings performing necessary work. The applause that followed was not the perfunctory clapping of military formality. It was genuine, sustained, the sound of people recognizing truth when they heard it. Helena felt emotion tightening her throat, but maintained her composure. General Thornton stepped forward again. I think Colonel Vasquez has given us enough to think about for one evening. But before we conclude, I want to present the recognition that was always intended for tonight, though the circumstances have become rather unconventional. An aide appeared with a wooden display case, which Thornton accepted and opened carefully. Inside was a certificate and a distinctive medal, the Legion of Merit, its white ribbon edged in red, adding to the honors Helena already wore. Lieutenant Colonel Helena Vasquez, Thornton read from the certificate, for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services and achievements. Your development of comprehensive combat readiness protocols has fundamentally altered how this nation prepares its warriors for the challenges they will face. Your work reflects the highest standards of military professionalism and will save countless lives in the years to come. Helena stood at attention as General Thornton pinned the medal to her dress, joining the silver star she had revealed earlier. The general's hands were steady, her movements precise, but Helena could see emotion in her eyes. You scared about 10 years off my life tonight, Thornton murmured quietly enough that only Helena could hear. But I have to admit, you made your point more effectively than any formal presentation could have achieved. Helena smiled slightly. I apologize for the concern, ma'am. It was not my intention to cause distress. I know it was not, Thornton replied, stepping back and saluting, which is precisely why it worked. The ballroom erupted in applause again, but this time it was mixed with a standing ovation. Officers rose to their feet in waves, their respect and admiration genuine and hard-earned. Helena scanned the crowd and saw faces she recognized, people she had served with and people she had never met, all united in this moment of acknowledgement. Near the back of the room, she spotted the young major who General Thornton had identified earlier as one of the soldiers Helena had pulled from the burning vehicle in Kandahar. He was standing with tears streaming down his face, his hand held over his heart. Next to him stood two other officers, both also visibly emotional, and Helena realized with a jolt that they must be the other two soldiers from that day. All three had survived, had continued their service, had built lives because of decisions she had made in seconds while the world burned around them. The weight of that realization threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. This was why she had developed her protocols, why she had spent countless hours translating battlefield trauma into frameworks that might spare others. This was why it mattered, not for medals or recognition, but for the living, breathing human beings who got to go home because someone had prepared them better, had given them tools to survive and thrive under impossible circumstances. General Thornton seemed to sense Helena's emotional state and smoothly took control again. We will now move into the reception portion of the evening. I encourage everyone to reflect on what we have experienced tonight and to consider how you can bring these lessons into your daily leadership. Colonel Vasquez will be available for those who wish to speak with her, though I ask that you be respectful of her time and energy. She has had quite an evening. As the formal program concluded and officers began to move about the ballroom, Helena found herself immediately surrounded by people wanting to speak with her, to thank her, to share their own reflections on the evening's events. The reception had taken on an energy unlike any military gala Helena had ever attended. Officers moved through the ballroom with purpose, engaging in conversations that seemed to matter in ways that formal networking rarely did. She found herself at the center of multiple discussions, some about her protocols, others about the evening's revelations, all of them marked by an unusual depth of authenticity. Captain Reyes approached with 2 cups of coffee, offering one to Helena with a slight smile. "I thought you might appreciate being served for a change, ma'am. Though I promise this coffee is much better than what you were carrying around earlier." Helena accepted the cup gratefully. "Thank you, Captain. And thank you for your discretion when you recognized me. That could have played out very differently." Reyes shook his head. "Ma'am, with respect, I think it played out exactly as it needed to. I attended your lecture at JAG School last year. You talked about creating conditions for authentic learning rather than performative compliance. Tonight was authentic learning on a scale I have never witnessed." Before Helena could respond, the 3 officers she had recognized earlier approached together. Up close, she could see how they had changed since Kandahar. The young major was no longer the terrified private she had pulled from the flames. He carried himself with confidence and purpose, though his eyes still held the weight of what they had experienced together. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am Major David Klein. You saved my life in Kandahar. I have wanted to thank you properly for years, but you were always deployed or in meetings or otherwise unavailable. Tonight seems like fate." Helena felt her own eyes burning. "Major Klein, I remember you. You kept talking about your daughter's birthday, even while you were bleeding. You said you had promised to be there when she turned 3. Klein nodded, tears spilling over. "She turned 21 last month, ma'am. I was there for that birthday, and everyone in between because of you. She is at West Point now, following in her old man's footsteps." The 2 officers with him introduced themselves, each sharing their own stories of recovery and continued service. They spoke of nightmares and therapy, of marriages saved and children raised, of careers built on the foundation of a second chance Helena had given them. Their gratitude was overwhelming, a tangible force that made her previous discomfort at the gala seem trivial by comparison. "You 3 honor me by your service," Helena said quietly. "But I want you to know something. I did not save you alone. We saved each other. Your courage in those moments, your determination to survive, that was yours. I just made sure you had the opportunity to exercise it. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Whitmore, who approached with visible trepidation. The three rescued officers instinctively positioned themselves slightly in front of Helena, a protective gesture that was both touching and unnecessary. Colonel Vasquez, Whitmore began, his voice subdued. I wanted to speak with you privately if possible. I understand if you would prefer not to, but I feel I owe you more than the public apology I made earlier. Helena studied him for a moment, seeing not the belligerent drunk from earlier, but a man genuinely wrestling with his failures. She nodded to Major Klein and his companions, who reluctantly stepped aside, though they remained close enough to intervene if needed. "Walk with me, General," Helena said, gesturing toward the ballroom's perimeter where they could speak with relative privacy. They moved away from the clusters of conversation, walking slowly along the wall where photographs of previous galas hung in formal arrangement. Whitmore seemed to be struggling to find words, his usual bluster completely absent. "I've been thinking about what you said," he finally began. "About how I treated you, about how I treat people in general. And I realized something terrible. I have become the kind of officer I used to despise when I was a young lieutenant. Arrogant, dismissive, more concerned with maintaining authority than earning respect." Helena listened without interrupting, allowing him the space to work through his confession. "My son is a corporal," Whitmore continued, his voice cracking slightly. "He is deployed right now, serving under officers I do not know. And tonight, watching my own behavior, I thought about those officers treating him the way I treated you, the way I have treated countless others. It made me physically ill." He stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "I cannot undo the damage I have done over the years. I cannot take back the harsh words or the casual cruelty or the times I made people feel small because it made me feel big. But I can commit to doing better from this moment forward. That is what I wanted to tell you, that you changed something fundamental in me tonight, and I will not waste that gift." Helena saw the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine remorse that went beyond embarrassment or fear of consequences. This was a man confronting his own character and finding it wanting a painful but necessary reckoning. "General Whitmore," Helena said carefully, "I accept your apology, and I believe your commitment to change. But I want you to understand something. The real test will not be how you treat me going forward, or even how you treat other officers. It will be how you treat the people you encounter who have no power, no rank, no ability to affect your career. The clerks and maintenance staff and junior enlisted. That is where character lives or dies." "I understand," Whitmore said quietly, "and I will do better. Not perfectly, probably. Old habits die hard, but better." They stood in silence for a moment, an odd peace settling between them. Then Whitmore straightened, some of his military bearing returning. "For what it is worth, Colonel, your protocols are brilliant. I have been resisting their implementation in my command because I thought they were too soft, too focused on feelings rather than fighting. Tonight showed me I was wrong about that too. I will be personally overseeing their adoption when I return to my post." Helena inclined her head in acknowledgement. "That means a great deal, General. Thank you." As Whitmore walked away, his shoulders slightly less burdened than when he had approached, General Thornton appeared at Helena's side. She had been watching the exchange from a distance, her expression unreadable. "That was generous of you," Thornton observed. "Not many people would extend grace to someone who treated them as he treated you." Helena shrugged slightly. "Everyone deserves the opportunity to be better than their worst moment, ma'am. I have certainly needed that grace myself more than once." Thornton smiled, a warm expression that transformed her usually stern features. "Which is exactly why you are the right person to be leading this cultural transformation. You understand that change requires both accountability and compassion. Most people can only manage one or the other." They watched together as the ballroom continued its unusual conversations, officers engaging with questions of character and leadership in ways that transcended rank and position. Secretary Chun was deep in discussion with a group of junior officers, listening more than speaking. The Admiral was talking with Marcus, who had been invited back into the ballroom and was describing his experience of the evening from the kitchen staff perspective. "This is going to ripple outward," Thornton said thoughtfully. "What happened here tonight? It will spread through the military community like wildfire. You realize that, don't you? You have just become the face of something much larger than combat readiness protocols." Helena felt the weight of that reality settling onto her shoulders. "I know, ma'am. I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about it." "Feel about it later," Thornton advised with a slight smile. "Right now, embrace it. Use it. You have been given a platform most officers would kill for. Make it count." Helena nodded slowly, looking around at the transformed ballroom, at the officers engaged in genuine reflection and dialogue, at the possibility for real institutional change that had emerged from the most unlikely circumstances. She thought about the young soldiers who would benefit from these conversations, who would serve under officers changed by this evening's lessons, who might live because dignity and respect had become more than abstract values. The evening had not turned out anything like she had planned, but perhaps it had turned out exactly as it needed to. The evening was drawing to a close, though the energy in the ballroom remained remarkably vibrant. Officers who would normally have departed hours ago lingered in conversation, reluctant to leave the space where something profound had occurred. Helena found herself once more at the head table, this time seated properly as an honored guest, watching the room with a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. Miss Patterson approached tentatively, her clipboard now held loosely at her side rather than pressed against her chest like armor. "Colonel Vasquez," she began, her voice uncertain, "I owe you an enormous apology. I should have listened when you tried to explain. I should have taken a moment to understand the situation rather than simply barking orders. I made assumptions based on your clothing and the circumstances, and those assumptions were completely wrong." Helena gestured to an empty chair. "Please, sit down for a moment." Patterson sat, looking uncomfortable but determined. Helena studied the woman who had thrust her into this entire situation, seeing now what she had missed earlier in the chaos. The exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the weight of managing an event of this scale with insufficient staff and impossible expectations. "Miss Patterson," Helena said gently, "you were doing your job under difficult circumstances. You had servers call in sick and 300 demanding guests to manage. You saw someone who appeared to be staff, and you directed them to help. That is not malice. That is triage." "But I did not listen," Patterson protested. "You tried to tell me, and I cut you off." "Yes," Helena acknowledged, "and that is worth examining. But I also chose to go along with it rather than being more assertive. We both made choices tonight. The question is what we learn from them." Patterson nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "I learned that I need to slow down and actually hear people, even when I'm stressed. And I learned that dignity is not something people earn through their position. It is something they deserve by virtue of being human." Helena smiled. "That is a lesson many people in this room learned tonight. You're in good company." As Patterson returned to her duties, visibly lighter than when she had arrived, Marcus approached with several other kitchen staff members. They stood together nervously, clearly unsure of protocol for addressing a decorated officer who had spent the evening working alongside them. "Ma'am," Marcus began, "we just wanted to say thank you for what you said earlier about the value of our work. Most people never even see us, let alone acknowledge that what we do matters." Helena stood to address them properly. "It does matter. Every organization depends on people willing to do the necessary work that keeps everything else functioning. You feed people, which is fundamental to everything else that happens. That is not less important than what I do. It is differently important, and our military would collapse without it." One of the older kitchen workers, a woman with silver streaks in her hair and kind eyes, spoke up. "My son is in the army, ma'am. He is a sergeant stationed in Germany. I worry about him constantly. But tonight, hearing you talk about dignity and respect, I feel better knowing there are officers like you looking out for soldiers like him." Helena felt emotion tightening her throat again. "I promise you, there are many officers who care deeply about the soldiers they lead. Tonight was about making sure we all remember to show that care consistently, not just when it is convenient." The kitchen staff thanked her again and departed, leaving Helena alone at the head table for the first time all evening. She took the moment to simply breathe, to process everything that had occurred, to let the weight and meaning of it settle into her bones. General Thornton returned, carrying 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to Helena and sat down beside her. "To the most memorable military excellence gala in recorded history," she said, raising her glass. Helena clinked glasses with her. "I am fairly certain that was not the kind of excellence you had in mind when you planned this event, ma'am." Thornton laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "No, it certainly was not. But I think it may have been exactly what we needed. Sometimes the best lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Tonight, you taught this room full of generals and admirals something they desperately needed to learn. That is a form of leadership most officers never achieve." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the last groups of officers prepared to depart. Captain Reyes was exchanging contact information with several other JAG officers, clearly planning to coordinate on implementing dignity-focused training. Secretary Chun was still in deep conversation with the Admiral about expanding the protocols across all service branches. The 3 soldiers Helena had saved were laughing together near the exit, their bond forged in fire, but strengthened by years of continued friendship. "What happens now, ma'am?" Helena asked quietly. "After tonight, after all of this?" Thornton considered the question carefully. "Now the hard work begins. Cultural change is not accomplished in one evening, no matter how dramatic. We have momentum, which is valuable. We have commitment from senior leadership, which is essential. But translating that into lasting institutional transformation will require sustained effort over months and years." She turned to look at Helena directly. "And you, Colonel Vasquez, are going to be at the center of that effort whether you plan for it or not. Your protocols were already gaining traction. After tonight, they will become foundational to how we think about leadership development. Are you prepared for that?" Helena thought about the question, about the increased visibility and scrutiny, about the weight of expectation and the possibility of failure. Then she thought about Major Klein's daughter at West Point, about young soldiers who would serve under officers changed by tonight's lessons, about the ripple effects of choosing dignity over expedience. "I am prepared, ma'am," she said firmly. "It will not be easy, but the important work rarely is." Thornton nodded approvingly. "Good, because we start first thing Monday morning. I am assigning you additional staff and resources. We are going to turn your protocols into a comprehensive leadership development program that every officer in every branch will complete. And we're going to make sure that programs like this, events like these, become opportunities for genuine growth rather than just formal recognition ceremonies." As the evening finally concluded and officers began filing out of the ballroom, many stopped to speak with Helena one last time. Some offered thanks, others shared reflections, several requested meetings to discuss implementation of her ideas in their commands. Each interaction reinforced the reality of what had occurred, the transformation that had begun in this space and would continue far beyond it. Finally, only a handful of people remained. General Thornton, Captain Reyes, Secretary Chun, and the 3 soldiers Helena had saved stood together near the exit, their conversation relaxed and genuine in a way that transcended rank and formality. Helena joined them, feeling the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with her. The funeral that morning felt like it had occurred weeks ago rather than hours. She had come to this gala planning to accept recognition quietly and then return home. Instead, she had served dinner, confronted institutional prejudice, and accidentally sparked a movement for cultural transformation. "Before you all disperse," Helena said to the small group, "I want you to know that tonight changed me too. It reminded me why I developed these protocols in the first place. Not for awards or recognition, but because every single person who puts on a uniform deserves to be treated with dignity and prepared with the tools they need to survive and thrive. That is the mission. Everything else is just logistics." If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or character. Maybe you have witnessed similar courage or transformation in your own life, Or perhaps you have experienced moments when someone's true character was revealed in unexpected ways. We would love to hear your thoughts and experiences. As the group dispersed into the night, Helena stood alone in the empty ballroom for a final moment. The space that had been filled with hundreds of people, with conflict and revelation and transformation, was now quiet and still. But the echoes of what had occurred here would continue reverberating through military culture for years to come. She removed her blazer and looked down at the Silver Star and Legion of Merit pin to her dress. The medals caught the light from the chandeliers, symbols of service and sacrifice and the complex relationship between recognition and worth. She had earned these honors through courage and dedication. But tonight, she had learned something equally important. That true dignity required no medals, no rank, no external validation. It existed in every person who chose kindness over cruelty, respect over dismissal, humanity over hierarchy. Helena smiled to herself, a small expression of satisfaction and hope. Then she walked out of the ballroom and into the night, ready for whatever challenges and opportunities the future would bring. The server's apron had been folded and left behind, but the lessons it had taught would remain with her, and with everyone who had witnessed this remarkable evening for the rest of their lives.